And I'd also like to remind everyone that today's plenary and a couple of the sessions are streamed live, and so we have an audience that is not attending with us today, but they're part of the program. What I'd like to do, and it's a great privilege to ask Dr. George Askew, who is Clemson University's Vice President of Public Service and Agriculture, and he's also serving as Interim Dean of the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Life Sciences, to provide the opening remarks and the welcome. I can't say enough good things about Dr. Askew. He has been totally supportive of this conference. We originated the conference through Clemson University, through PSA, and we've had significant support by them throughout. So, George, if you would open the conference for us, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to the 4th Biennial South Carolina Water Resources Conference. The conference was founded and is organized by Clemson University's Institutes of Computational Ecology in conjunction with a 23-member planning committee made up of water professionals representing the major state universities, agencies, and private sector groups. The conference provides an open forum to discuss water policies, research projects, and water management in the state. Our 3 previous conference events brought together over 300 participants. 300, that's a lot. I think you're pressing 350 today. From colleges and universities, municipal water authorities, environmental engineering, consulting and law firms, state and federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, economic development associations, utility companies, land trusts, and others. That's pretty much everybody in the state, sooner or later, is involved in one of those organizations, which is important, because I think last time I checked, pretty much everyone in the state uses water in one form or capacity or another. The theme of this year's conference, Informing Strategic Water Planning to Address Natural Resource, Community, and Economic Challenges, focuses on the development of a statewide water plan, which I think is very critical. It's nice to see South Carolina taking this on. I hope we learn from some of the trials and tribulations from out west, and it's always nice to do your planning and your research and your education while it's not yet the ultimate critical situation as it is in some places in this country and in the world. The opening keynote plenary features legislative and major business leaders, as you see up here today. The second day plenary features state and federal agency and nonprofit representatives from the upstate, Midlands, and coast. Each panelist may have his or her own take on developing an effective water plan, but overall, the message will be that we need to work together. Absolutely, amen to that. To collaborate, to ensure that South Carolina has the quantity and quality of water we need for a healthy and prosperous future. Sometimes we don't think about it until we have a drought. I know when I moved to Clemson 7 years ago, Lake Hartwell, I believe, was 19 feet below full pool, and everybody was thinking about water. The nice thing is the rains came, and now we have a full lake. So we want to make sure we don't forget about thinking about that until the next time it's 19 feet down. Clemson PSA is an underwriter in the conference because water is so vital to growth in South Carolina. Every economic sector, agriculture, forestry, tourism, and industry. We recognize that both ecology and economics are vital for the South Carolina prosperity. We've invested heavily in water over the years through our legislative appropriations, through private contracts with counties, every aspect you could think of, from agriculture to rural areas through precision agriculture, our intelligent farm program, our intelligent forest program, the intelligent river program, to the urban sector where our Carolina Clear stormwater programs I think are crucial to both the environmental stability in the urban areas and our water resources, as well as understanding the whole flow of the water cycle from the headwaters to the coast. So with that, I want to welcome you again. I also want to thank our 2014 major contributors who make this all possible. Besides Clemson University Public Service and Agriculture, we have Duke Energy, Santee Cooper, the Charleston Water System, Greenville Water, Anderson Regional Joint Water System, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and YSI Incorporated. And I hope everybody gets to visit most of this conference. I'm planning on staying around. I'd like to see where my money's going that Dr. Ideson's spending at Clemson. And he does spend it well. I think many of you were involved in programs that we're doing at Clemson, and we hope to work well together as the water plan comes together, so that in the future, we all have the water we want, and we all have it the way we want it, where we want it, when we want it, and most importantly, we understand every aspect there is to know about it so we can make rational decisions. And with that, welcome, have a good conference.
Good morning. My name is Gene Idson. I am co-chair of the conference, and on behalf of the Planning Committee, I too want to welcome you here. This, I think, will be our largest conference in terms of attendees, and I think the issues at hand really drive the conference. The 2014 plenaries that we've developed have been designed to inform attendees of broad perspectives in water resources planning by legislative, business, regulatory, and nonprofit leaders. We face many overall challenges, not only in South Carolina, but throughout our nation and really globally. South Carolina is a wonderful place to live, and so we anticipate population growth, we anticipate economic growth, we anticipate there may be competing and conflicting demands for water in the near term. We have suffered recurring droughts. We have to strengthen our drought preparedness. We have to think about water use priorities in this comprehensive water plan. And there's a shift today in the way that we monitor. So with big data and the advent of big data and transformational technologies, how are we going to use these new information technology systems to be able to actually monitor and make decisions in real time? How are we going to minimize and how are we going to really predict the impact of land use changes on our water resources? How are we going to address potential climate alterations? And then how will we manage our rivers so that we can meet those environmental flows that are really necessary to maintain our diversity? So we all recognize that large-scale collaboration is absolutely essential among many stakeholders if we're going to develop and implement a comprehensive water plan that really brings solutions and allows us to share the benefit so that we'll have a resilient and sustainable water for the future. That collaboration really begins with many stakeholders on a statewide basis. And this conference, this is our fourth conference. It's been a great opportunity to exchange ideas. It's an academic conference to understand research and education. It's brought a lot of us together that really did not know each other, and has strengthened that across the state. We've really gained a strong appreciation over the conferences for how water, energy, industry, agriculture, tourism are all tightly intertwined when it comes to water. And water is necessary for energy production. Energy is really necessary if we're going to extract and deliver water. And then, of course, water is essential for agriculture and industry. We're not the first state to really tackle the comprehensive water planning challenge. Many states are in the process of doing it, and a few states have completed it. And we hope that some of these will provide a blueprint for us to follow. But one of the key things that we see is regional input. And all of the plans that I've read throughout the nation really rely on meaningful public input, meaningful dialogue among all the economic sectors, and place-based or regional decision-making. So ultimately, all of these regional plans get folded into really a combined, economically feasible, comprehensive water plan that will serve our state. In the past two conferences, I will tell you, this legislative session has been such fun. If we have any comments, everyone says, do more of the legislative session. And so today, we have expanded our legislative session to also include some business perspectives, and we think that will enliven the conversation. And in developing the plenary, we asked panelists to consider several things, and we ask you to consider those. What do you see as the major challenges and major issues for us to develop a well-crafted, efficient water plan? What specifics are there to your particular economic sector? What recommendations do you have in developing the framework? And should we not only include in-state participation, but do we need to include participation among states that share water? A big question is, can we as a state allocate the financial resources necessary to fund both the development and implementation of a comprehensive water plan? If I'm not mistaken, to date, we have about $1.2 million in funding. But compare that to Georgia, that's over $30 million, and compare that to other states. How much money will we need, and will we have those financial resources? And I think we have the people that will tell us that. And can we fund our aging infrastructure? Can we fund the repairs necessary and the replacements necessary? The latest estimate is that's at least a $2 billion endeavor. And if we're really going to go into water conservation, that again will be essential. And so the plenary framework today, we're going to ask each of the panelists to provide individual remarks up to 8 minutes. We've asked them to keep it to 8 minutes. And at the end of all of the remarks, we will have the question session. So please, no questions until all the remarks are made. And we ask that those questions be very targeted. We would like you to frame that question within a 2-minute period. You're welcome to ask the question directly. We have microphones here that you can ask the questions. Or if you prefer to write the question down, there's a chair by the door with paper and pencils. We'll be glad to ask those questions for you. And really, who better to lead the discussion today than Senator Paul Campbell? I tell you, we have leaned on him really hard over these last couple of sessions, and he's just been amazing. He's been really instrumental in helping to guide this legislative discussion. It's informative to us, and it gives us some insight into the legislation that's moving forward. Paul certainly brings a tremendous amount of experience, both in the private sector and the public sector. He's a member of the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources, Finance, and Transportation Committees. Also today we'll have Senator Danny Verdon, who's chairman of the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. We'll have Senator Wes Hayes, who's chairman of the Senate Banking and Insurance Committee. Representative Nelson Hardwick, who's chairman of the House Ag, Natural Resources, and Environmental Affairs Committee. He's joined by Representative Hyatt, who also is on that committee. We have Representative Don Bowen. Don's been very instrumental in developing the Savannah River Basin Caucus. It's very important to him. And then from a business standpoint, we have several executives here from utilities. We have Jeff Lineberger here from Duke, and Jeff is Director of Water Strategy and Hydro Licensing. Danny Casas is SCE&G. He's the VP of Customer Relations and Renewables. Jeff Penland has joined us from Santee Cooper. He's a senior attorney. He handles state and federal environmental affairs. Dyke Spencer is here today. He's General Manager of Powdersville Waterworks, but he has served in the past as the South Carolina American Water Works Association Utility Council Director. And then David Winkles, who's President and CEO of the South Carolina Farm Bureau. We really do have an excellent panel. And gentlemen, I do appreciate your willingness to be here today. And Senator Campbell, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Gene.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're going to share some thoughts, individual thoughts, and then we open the floor up for questions and challenges us. Ask us tough questions if you'd like, and we'll give you a good answer, because we're talking about a very, very precious resource, and the water we use in this state for so many different ways, from growing food to personal consumption to everything that we do hinges around water. So we're going to talk about some of those things. And George, I remember one of my friends in Clemson a couple of years ago said he was doing something that he never thought he would do. And I said, what's that? He says, I took my lawnmower down to my boat and cut the grass around it. So, you know, we do have drought situations we got to work with. I'm going to share some of my thoughts and ideas, and then we're going to turn it over to Senator Hayes and go down to Senator Representative Hardwick, Representative Hyatt, and Don's going to share with us, Don Bowen's going to share with us what's going on in the Savannah Caucus, Savannah River Caucus. And then we're going to go down the list of the folks that try to make money off the precious resource we use and try to turn it into something that you can use as consumers, as business people, as farmers, or whatever else that we need to go with it. I'm concerned a little bit about some of the interstate issues that we've had. A couple of years ago, we did have a lawsuit brought by South Carolina Attorney General against North Carolina because they were diverting water out of the Catawba River Basin, taking it for use up there and discharging it back into Yadkin River Basin. They're taking our water before it ever gets to us. Now, it's their water, it's interstate, but yet, by the same token, we got to have that water. So we resolved that without going into court, resolved it without going forward. And I had a little concern over it because basically we were doing a little bit the same thing when we were taking water out of the Savannah River and discharging it back in one of the rivers in the upstate. So, a lot of times it's going to take us to be flexible, be innovative in how we handle our waters in our rivers. We have sufficient surface water if we just take care of it, monitor it, conserve it, and make sure we use it for wise uses. You've heard recently about some Georgia and South Carolina issues. I know that when we were having the drought in the upstate, especially at Lake Sidney Lanier down near dried up down near Atlanta, and there was talk about Georgia coming and taking water out of the Savannah River to go to Atlanta. We certainly don't want to see that happen because, again, that's our water we use all the way down to the coast, all the way down past Savannah. So we got to be careful about those issues. I know that Georgia and Alabama have had some issues. So you're going to see more and more of these states with these issues. It's going to become more and more frequent as we battle over a precious resource on water. So you're going to see some of that stuff going forward. And we got to make sure we protect what we do. Now we're at the back end because when we discharge into the Atlantic Ocean. So we can take care of the Atlantic Ocean, but we got to make sure we get enough water coming to us from the river basins that feed what we need in South Carolina. I'm concerned about saltwater intrusion. As we draw down the underground aquifers, we're going to see potential saltwater intrusion into what we're seeing, especially in the lower counties. The Beaufort, the Hamptons, the Jasper counties, we're going to see some of that happen. I've got a real concern over dredging the Savannah River because they're going to take it down to 47 feet. And they're going to try to protect the aquatic life by bubbling oxygen into the river using great big barges and positive displacement blowers. I just don't see how you can turn the Savannah River into an aquarium. That's exactly what we're trying to do there. But I'm concerned they're going to breach some of the underground aquifers. And if they do that, who's going to pay for the desalination plants for the water in those areas? So I'm concerned about some of those issues, and I think we've got to be careful with that. There was an article in, I think, the New York Times either yesterday or the day before talking about the issues they're having in California, and they're having these same interstate issues out there. So it's going to happen. It's going to come. And as long as we're doing what we do and doing it prudently and doing it with looking at the future on conservation and trying to control consumption, but yet at the same time taking care of our citizens and our businesses and our farmers, we've got to continue to do those type of things. But I don't know what's going to happen when they dredge it down because it's going to silt right back up. But it's really going to cause problems in the lower part of the state and the part of the region, taking that river down to 47 feet. And I'm not sure the science is there to do what we're talking about doing with those blowers. We got to have collaboration among agencies. We got to have DHEC and DNR working together. We got to make sure that all the groups in the state, from the Farm Bureau, is working with us on these type of things. We got to make sure we take in higher education. We got to make sure we take in those type of things. There's a lot of work we can do on collaboration to be more effective and efficient. You heard what Gene was saying about the amount of money Georgia's got to handle their water. We don't have that kind of resource in South Carolina, and we're not going to have it anytime soon. So basically, we got to take advantage of all the synergies we got in this state, of marshaling the universities to work with DHEC, work with DNR, take the expertise that exists in higher education all over the state and put it to work. And at the same time, we do a great job of educating our scientists that are coming out of those institutions so that they're getting real hands-on work experience and providing really useful information, and we can take advantage of the synergies and become more economical in the way we handle those type of things. I think that's super important. We got to move to new technology as fast as we possibly can. You're going to hear a little bit about, I think while you're down here, the intelligent river technology that Dr. Wrightson has come up with at Clemson. For about $24 million, about $3 million per river basin, we've got 8 major river basins in South Carolina. For about $24 million, we could monitor each one of our river basins from the mountains to the ocean, and we could get real-time data. That means we don't send technicians out to take water samples, send them to a laboratory and have them analyzed, and about 3 or 4 weeks after the fact, you get the information you need to monitor what's going on in that river. With intelligent rivers, you can actually get it almost instantaneous. It goes from little sensors, it floats in the river, it goes straight to a satellite, it goes straight to the host computer, and you can tell what the flow in the river is. You can tell the depth in the river. You can tell if there's something in the river that shouldn't be there. We could actually use that technology to control when people discharge into the river, whether it's a public system or business or private system. And we need to take advantage of that, but it would cost about $3 million per basin to do that. You probably hear of some of the stuff that they're doing in the Savannah River right now, especially down around Augusta, that they're already doing some of this stuff. We need to take advantage of technology. I think it's super important going forward. You can also use that same intelligent river technology for farmers to tell if they're overwatering or underwatering a field. You know, are we putting too much water? Are we wasting water? So we can take advantage of technology to help us in so many different ways, and we need to be doing those type of things. I am concerned about aging infrastructure, okay? And I'm concerned because the federal dollars are drying up. A lot of the money we come from for working on infrastructure is coming from the federal government. Folks, they're running out of money. And at some point, we're going to have to pay the price on that. We're going to have to, the Fed's not going to be as lucrative in giving us grants and stuff to enhance our infrastructure on our water systems. And we're continuing to grow population in South Carolina. That's why we added another House district, U.S. House district, in this last census. And it's going to continue to grow. We're growing about 1.5% or 2% a year. So we've got to make sure that we got enough systems in place, infrastructure, to take care of the needs that are coming and going to continue to increase. So we've got to make sure we do those type of things. And we got to fund it. The comprehensive, fully integrated state water plan is essential for the state. It's something we have to have. We have to be looking at the future. We got to be looking at our needs, not next year, not even 5 years, not even 10 years. We got to be looking at 20 years as to exactly what our needs are going to be and how we're planning to take care of our resource on water and do the things that we need to do. So we got to have a comprehensive plan, water plan in this state to look at least 20 years so we can make sure we're doing smart, intelligent things today so that we're not mortgaging in our future by doing something foolish today. And drought management is certainly an issue. I can tell you that when I was a president with Alcoa, I was responsible for the facilities of North Carolina. If you go back to the, I think 2001, 2002, when we had the big drought up there, Alcoa's got 4 dams on the Yadkin River. The Yadkin becomes a PD when it goes into North Carolina. We were getting life threats because we were actually draining water out of the lakes, the 4 lakes behind those dams up there. We were getting people that depended on it for their livelihood. They were threatening us because we were drawing that down. At the same time, downstream in Florence and Georgetown, we were getting threats from that people because they weren't getting enough water. So if it hadn't been for those 4 dams on the Yadkin River at that time, the Yadkin and the PD would have probably been almost dry riverbed. So that's how much that you got to control things and you got to look at it. And you heard about the situation in Clemson where it was down 19 feet. Lake Hartwell was down 19 feet. So we've got to make sure we're ready to manage drought because it's going to continue to come on a periodic basis. Everything is good right now, but it's not always going to be good. It's just been a few years ago we had these severe droughts. And the last thing I'll tell you is we do have a surface water permitting in South Carolina, permit. We put that in place about 2 or 3 years ago. It took the Senate and the House 5 years to turn that into legislation. It took us 5 years because we had so many different competing interests in that. If you think about it, you've got DHEC, you've got DNR, you got the farmers, you got the utilities, you got the business groups. You got so many different groups that have an interest in what's going on with water, and it took us 5 years to pull this together. That's how complicated this issue is going to be going forward. So we got to make sure we work together. We got to be smart about how we work together, and so we got to make sure that we do the things right and looking toward the future. So I'm going to stop here and tell you that, like I say, 5 years to get a piece of legislation through. And my chairman assigned me to that task. I'm not sure why he did that, but he did. We're going to let each one of us talk a few minutes, and then we'll come back. And since you got here, Danny, we'll go to Wes and let you get a few minutes to look around. Wes?
Good morning. You're probably wondering why the chairman of the Banking and Insurance Committee is talking to this group. I'm kind of wondering that myself. But if you'll notice, I represent York County. And York County is where the Catawba River crosses over from Mecklenburg County into York County. And so we have been kind of, maybe not so much as Savannah, but maybe second to the Savannah. That's going to be one of the key battle areas on water issues. And so I've been somewhat involved in this on the Senate side for a number of years. A few years ago, Duke Power, I think as part of their relicensing, suggested to several of us in the House, in the House and Senate in North and South Carolina, that we start a bi-state commission, a bi-state study commission on the Catawba-Watery River Basin. I know Senator Clodfelter at the time, he's the mayor of Charlotte right now. He was involved on the North Carolina side along with Fountain Odom, and I was kind of working on the South Carolina side to get that started. I guess that was, I've lost track of time, at least 10 years ago when we were looking at that. And we made the commission up. It's appointed by a certain number from the Speaker and from the President Pro Tempore of the Senate and other stakeholders, such as some of the key cities along the way that are water consumers, some of the big industry that have to do with water, some of your citizen group, homeowners groups, and others have representation at the table. But that bi-state commission has been, in my opinion, a tremendous success, and I think an example of what should be happening on other river basins that affect more than one state. And invariably, most river systems affect more than one state because you've got, not only can you get some good information, but you've got some of the players sitting at the table that can get things done. Two examples of that. One of the things that became apparent to our group early on was that North and South Carolina were two of the states in the Southeast, I think maybe the only two, but certainly two of the states that did not have surface water permitting. Georgia had it and has had it for several years, in South Carolina, the Department of Natural Resources and DHEC both. In North Carolina, they're combined under one agency, but they said that that's the one missing area as far as water that we needed to have in our two states. And basically, this bi-state commission was to a certain extent the genesis of the very beginning of the talks on surface water permitting. I'll give all credit to Paul Campbell and to Danny Verdon and to the House people that carried that through, because that was not an easy process. But part of the beginning of that came from that bi-state commission that pointed out the need. It's interesting that North Carolina is kind of taking their approach a little different than South Carolina. We passed the permitting law and regulations first, and now we're getting the studies done to look at the different water basins in South Carolina. North Carolina is going through and doing the study first, and then they hope to pass the water permitting bill and regulation after the studies are done. But nevertheless, both states are in the process of either permitting or at least doing the studies leading to permitting. And that came to a certain extent from the bi-state commission. Another issue that came from the bi-state commission to a certain extent was the North Carolina and South Carolina lawsuit that was mentioned by Senator Campbell. That really came from an interbasin transfer that they were looking in North Carolina to move water out of the Catawba Basin and over to the Yadkin. In South Carolina was not really at the table. We were being affected by an interbasin transfer that we were not being consulted on. And we, didn't feel that was right, and the Attorney General brought a lawsuit, and the commission played an important part on getting that lawsuit resolved because, a number of us, sat down and kind of said that, this is going to be many, many years and many millions of dollars to fight this thing, and where do we think we're going to end up is where we ended up, where South Carolina will be consulted in the future, and we do have recognized some minimum flows to guarantee that we'll have a certain amount of water coming over into South Carolina, which is the bottom line. So once again, that bi-state commission, I think, played an important role on getting that lawsuit resolved. So if I had any message to bring today, I would say that on other river basins that's something that you really need to look at forming because it's been, I think, invaluable to the Catawba watery basin. The key thing that I see that we need to do permitting-wise is, we looked at Georgia to a certain extent when we did the water permitting, and I think Georgia had excluded agriculture, and we excluded agriculture too, to a great extent. But I think no one really envisioned some of your mega agricultural farms coming in that are going to use a lot of water. So I think we'll need to look again. I don't want to cause heart failure to Farm Bureau and the rest of them because nobody wants to pick on your traditional farming. But some of these mega farms could have a much bigger impact maybe than big industry or cities on the amount of water that they use. So I think we've got to look at that when we look at the water permitting in the future to perhaps include that. So that would, with that challenge, I'll sit down and I'll be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, some of my detractors think I was born 50 years too late, live in the past, and have a Norman Rockwellian view of the country. And they're probably right. Because I just hoofed it from the Metropolitan Art Museum up here on Main Street. Because for 2 days I've been thinking about that Norman Rockwell display exhibit. And so I'm chagrined to be here late, but thankful to be here. Had I spoken first, I was going to say that Wes Hayes is the voice and the force. He's the moral authority in our body, and I say that complimentary. He's a consummate gentleman. But boy, when he kicked that can open just now, I think Paul Campbell and I both got really tight in the seat. But no, seriously, hats off to Wes Hayes. 06, 07. When we're entering into a drought, we're looking at a major challenge, interbasin transport challenge from our neighboring state. Wes courageously forged ahead, had legislative initiatives, brought attention to the matter. Of course, was active in engaging the Attorney General, active in engaging his counterparts, creating the Bi-State Commission, the conversation. And of course, well, we're thankful for the outcomes. But the bottom line is it forces us to realize, hey, we're not living 50 years in the past. I hope 50 years in the future is not 5 years in the future. Already this morning, BASF was reminding me on the radio about how they convert saline water to usable water. It wasn't that long ago, I was in Southern California, where San Diego County alone has a larger agricultural economy than our whole state. And their farmers are willing to pay $435 an acre foot for the water. They're willing to pay $435 for an inch of rain a month. So we're so blessed here. But as it relates to all of our infrastructure, we've not always been where we should be in the planning and looking ahead. In this issue, I think I can safely say, thanks to responsive legislative leadership, prompted by tremendous stakeholder input. If I had to emphasize anything, and I think there were some prompting questions, appreciate Clemson putting this on. I think some of the prompting questions were, what's important? Well, for us up here, appreciate the House counterparts, for us is listening. And thanking you and them, all of you collectively, for working together. Now, Wes just mentioned that we got the cart before the horse. We got you, as it relates to the surface water withdrawal, we got you a law before we got you a measurement of the resource. We don't know what we've got yet. So and I appreciate the emphasis of the conference. It's absolutely critical. And I'll be much chagrined if the General Assembly doesn't step up with the resources necessary to measure these basins, get the data down. Because I view regulation as not trying to carve up, divvy up a little resource. I want to think that, just like use energy, for example, that we know we have more today, we know where more is today than we did yesterday. Through good conservation, through good management, through good resource sharing, we can do better today than we could yesterday. I think all of us want to be conservatively minded, conservational minded. But yeah, for us in the General Assembly, we know that it is imperative that we allow that we enable the regulators and the enforcement entities to have good measurement. So I'm keenly interested in what the resource is. I'm looking around for DNR and DHEC faces right now because I'm getting phone calls, folks. I'm getting phone calls that I'm always happy when I'm not getting phone calls from stakeholders. That lets me know that the stakeholders are interfacing nicely with the regulators. So when I start getting phone calls that they're nervous about, we got to have a robust and a very active interface. That's the only way we've got the law. Paul Campbell, the reason he got that job, because of his wealth of experience and also his tremendous talent level. Yeah, Wes Hayes and Paul Campbell. That's the reason we got that's the reason we had a legislative fix. I will agree with Wes, even though I won't single out agriculturally specifically, because I'll give you the case point, and maybe some of the agricultural instances will as well. Hey, the system worked. In South Carolina, the conversation worked. Where we thought we might have had an issue last year, we have resolution. But I'm not wanting to stifle off the conversation. I'm just saying, hey, let's give this legal framework, the rules of the game that we have right now, let's give it a chance to work, and let's further enable the regulators to know what we have. That's our challenge. My challenge right now is to sit down. Paul Campbell's yanking on my coat.
Now I'd like to bring up the chair of the House, Ag and Natural Resources, and somebody that we worked with very closely on the surface water permitting. Couldn't have happened without the leadership we had in the House.
Thank you, and good morning. It looked like this morning we had plenty of liquid sunshine when I drove from Horry County coming up here. I think it rained the entire way. I'll have to have a new pair of windshield wipers, I think, to get back home. I think the Senate and being first, they probably said all we need to be said about where we are. We have sort of got the cart before the horse with developing the law and that sort of thing, and now we need to identify exactly what our resources are, work through that, and get a better handle on what we're doing. The area I live in the PD area, we're one of the areas that still don't have a working relationship with North Carolina in a formal fashion. I try to work with the folks next to Horry and Brunswick and Columbus County, but we got to move upriver there and get a handle on what's happening on the Great PD River for the PD area and the source of sales tax income to the state of South Carolina, the tourist area down in our area. We hope to get that off the ground this year. It's one of the things I want to work on, make sure we get everybody appointed to that board and get started. As Danny said, our job basically is to listen more than we talk, and with that I look forward to your questions and your concerns, and we all need to work together because this is a team effort. It's always been that way in the House, and We appreciate y'all having us come back, and the input you give us is invaluable. Thank you so much. Dave?
Dave?
Good morning. It's my privilege to be here this morning. I'm Davey Hyatt. I represent House District 4 in Pickens County. I'm in a unique situation. My district starts in South Carolina, and my property line, it goes all the way up to the North Carolina line, and I'm very close to the Georgia line, so I've almost got 3 states right there together in my district. So I see a lot of these water issues, and like Chairman Hardwick said a little while ago, we had a lot of rain yesterday. I think I had a little over 3 inches of rain at my house yesterday, so it was it's ironic that we're talking about water this morning after what we had yesterday in Pickens County. As the previous speakers have mentioned, we talked about the surface water withdrawal permitting process, and when it came over to the House, Chairman Hardwick graciously gave it to me and my committee. I'm the chairman of subcommittee chairman of Environmental 1 subcommittee, and Chairman Hardwick assigned it to my committee. And I'll never forget the first meeting that we had. I walked in, the place is full of stakeholders and people like Sammy Fretwell standing back there with his pad and paper in hand ready to take good notes and all this kind of stuff. And I walk in, and my first question was, how much water do we have in South Carolina? You could have heard crickets in the room. I said, who owns the water in South Carolina? Once again, we heard crickets in the room. I said, well, at the time we were in the midst of coming out of the drought. Georgia had been coming over into Lake Hartwell and getting some of our water to try to take care of Lake Lanier and some of the Atlanta situation. And I said, well, who's stopping Atlanta? Who's stopping Georgia from coming over here to get our water? Didn't hear any response from anybody. And I finally said, look, I've asked 3 simple questions. I haven't had an answer yet. We got to get to work, folks. And before that session was over, we had a bill that the folks in the Senate had sent to us, and we had a bill that we could live with. I think the stakeholders were fairly happy with it. Most of them were. You don't always get everything you want. But at the end of the day, we had a bill and a piece of legislation that described how much water, to the best of our knowledge, how much water there was in South Carolina, who controlled the water in South Carolina, who had authority to stop Georgia, stop North Carolina from coming into the state of South Carolina. And those are the kind of things that we need to do. We've got that in place. Now we need to continue to build on that. I think we'll see that in the next legislative session. You know, Georgia certainly needs our water. North Carolina needs our water, but South Carolina certainly needs to protect their own water. But there's a lot of folks that have an interest in it. You know, the farmers, obviously. Farm Bureau and all the farmers, Hugh Weathers and Department of Agriculture want to make sure that agriculture gets what they need, and I certainly want to make sure they get that. DNR needs to make sure that they control their bodies of water. Industry needs to make sure that they have enough water. Department of Commerce came to us and said, hey, look, when we go to talk to a new business, we've got to guarantee them that we can supply them water. You know, a lot of people don't take that into consideration when you're talking about water needs in the state of South Carolina. But when the governor and the Department of Commerce is out recruiting new industry and they have to use water, you got to be able to guarantee these folks water that when they come into this state, they'll have it. So they're all very, very important issues. I think Duke Energy just recently set up I don't remember how many millions of dollars it was that your folks going to invest in water issues to make sure that the state of South Carolina understands the basic needs and understands that there is an issue, and we have to make sure that we do what we can. I think you're going to see in this legislative session that we're committed. There's a lot of things on our plate, but we're committed to making sure that water issues are addressed, permitting's addressed, making sure that our stakeholders are involved in the process, DNR, DHEC, all the folks that are involved. We want to hear from you folks. You folks are you're the boots on the ground every single day. They're doing the work. They're handling the process. They're handling the water that we have. We want to
to hear from you. Hopefully some of you, just a few minutes, will come to those microphones and ask us some questions that we may not even have thought about in the process, that may open our eyes to something entirely new that we need to address. And we hopefully that you'll come and ask those questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking them today, see one of us before we leave. Make sure we get those questions, because we want to make sure that South Carolina has the best overall product that we can offer. And one of the greatest natural resources is water. Thank you very much.
Representative Boeing is going to share some of the work he's been doing with George on the Savannah River Caucus.
Good morning, and it's an early morning at that. I have two commodities here. Which one of these do you think is the real gold? Now, with the weather we've had here lately, we might have a little bit of a hard time deciding which one it is, so maybe we need to call the people out in California and ask them to tell us which one it is. Yes, water has now become the new gold. I went to Bermuda about 35 years ago, and the one thing that stuck in my mind was that these people collected water off of the roofs of their house, and they stored it. It was a primitive technology, but they stored it for later usages. And then we move forward today, and we realize that our population is growing, and we have industry moving in, and the needs for water and where our water is all come into play. Nowadays, we even have satellites that can predict our weather. We can see on our satellite views where the rain is and how it's moving across the country. We even have Clemson's water technology program and Gene Idsen's Intelligent River to help us make diagnoses. And then we move into, then there are other things that come into play, that term we call interbasin transfers that we've all heard. The thing that I'm most concerned about interbasin transfers is that I think that a lot of times people get those, and we as a group should insist that we put attached to that interbasin transfer a drought clause on every one of them so that we have the flexibility to manage water better in our state. The state water plan is evolving, and Alvin Taylor, our new director, is coming up with a plan that's attuned to the needs of this current point in time, and it'll have a flexible eye on the future as well. We need to work with our legislative representatives because they provide the legislative teeth for all the plans, and they must be kept accurately and timely informed so that they don't come up with those ugly, unintended consequences that we do so many times. Since last year's water conference, we've made some positive steps. Early in the year, I went down into Georgia and met with my local representative who abuts the district that I represent, which is the great preponderance of it is Hartwell Lake. He and I got together and talked, and we got some members from the Georgia General Assembly, and we formed what we call a bi-state Savannah River Caucus. Now, what exactly is that? Well, it's a group of legislators from both South Carolina and Georgia who have joined forces with the commonality of water, who have districts that touch the Savannah River Basin. This group of bi-state representatives and senators and House of Representatives, I want to be sure we include y'all too, Paul. These people represent over 2 million people up and down the Savannah River Basin. And that's a lot of people, and will give us some clout when we go to Washington with areas that only our federal guys can help us with. Well, it's a group of, like I say, it's a group of legislators. We hope with this group we can take the lead in basin management and develop a prototype that can be used by our state, Georgia, and even North Carolina. We invited for the first time 20 members of the Georgia General Assembly to be guests for lunch here at the State House. Both the House and the Senate both welcomed them, and they all seemed to want to work together. It certainly beats the courtroom and the fees that are involved. It's much better when the principals sit down at the table over lunch over concerns and issues. The thing that I realized most was these people are just our neighbors, they're our friends, they're just across the creek from us. If we all work together, we can resolve the great preponderance of issues and never end up in the courtroom. Right now, according to Alan, Georgia has spent over $20 million in litigation to resolve some water issues they have, and they have not resolved them yet. Now let's move on to the early spring, the second big meeting. We had this at Big Oaks Park on Hartwell Lake. We had 500 plus people attend. We had Governor Deal, we had Governor Haley, we had both lieutenant governors, we had the heads of DNR, we had Colonel Tickner, the head of the Corps of Engineers of the Savannah River Division, and we had over 430 people who stayed and ate lunch. At this luncheon, we signed a $1 million compact agreement with the Corps and our respective DNRs to study the basin to get a realistic picture as to where we stand. The awareness has really been raised. The people want to help. It was a good meeting. There was good dialogue. The together being the operative word for all the stakeholders. DHEC and DNR both possess the expertise to do a lot of the things that need to be done. They just need our direction and our legal backing. Then we move forward one more time. The Georgia people wanted us to come down to their General Assembly. And I even got to speak at the speaker's podium in the Senate, and Paul said he wouldn't let me do that here in South Carolina. But the thing that I was most impressed with was that while we were there, we had people that weren't a member of the caucus, that were members of their General Assembly, who came and wanted to be an active part of this movement. One lady stood up and said, I want to be sure that my name is put on this endeavor. The momentum is building. The attention is focused on what is a positive thing. The science is moving fast on the issues. And here are just a few of them. Now, we talk about that assimilative capacity. If right now Georgia has, according to what I've read, about 97% of the assimilative capacity is being consumed by Georgia. If we could come up with money and help reduce the assimilative capacity, first of all, we could reduce flows more. And I think it's based on about 36,000 cubic feet per second. And this would help businesses if we helped them and not put that burden on their backs. And it would also give us here in South Carolina the ability to bring in businesses who need to release some discharge into our basins. We need to find more uses for secondhand water, such as gray water. We now use it on golf courses, but I'm sure if we really think hard, we could find other uses for it. Even our car washes reprocess 80% of their water. We need to increase the use of natural gas to provide peaking power to support our ever-growing backup on our baseload facilities. And we need to capture hydropower only from normal flows, using forced flows only in emergencies. We need also to use pump back functions wherever possible. We need to develop desalinization plants along the coastal areas. Right now, under Savannah, there's this huge Kona depression that's causing that saltwater intrusion, and we need to start looking to the future. This desalinization plants will give us the flexibility to work through drought times. We need to develop, this is a new one that y'all probably have never thought of. We need to develop an upstate water grid from the upper ends of the basin, so where we can shift water and do interbasin transfers from one basin to the other when we have certain levels of drought, not just on any given day. And if we can move oil around from one part of the country to the other, certainly we can move water and give us flexibility during extreme drought periods. Now, funding for this basin studies that we're trying to do and the management thereof is something that, of course, is always hard. Right now, between $19 and $25 million comes from SEPA and FERC agreements that for hydropower that's either produced or the ability for it to be produced. I used to think that they actually produced $21 million worth of hydropower, but in actuality, they only produce about 5 or 6, and the rest is paid based on the reserve capacity that we have. So if we take part of that money and divert it to managing the basin, it would help us on. But of course, this will require federal legislation. I've already made 2 trips to Washington and met with the Corps and our senators on that end, and they're more than willing to start looking into that and see if they can work with us on it. Yes, this is truly a multifaceted issue. We can all be successful if we all pull together and put good management practices of our God-given resource of pure gold, our water. A new gold rush is on, and we need to be leading the way and let the rest of them follow our lead. Thank you very much.
Now we're going to start with the people that use the water to turn it into something we all need every day, the power or something to put on our table to feed us all. So, Jeff, we'll start with you.
It's hard to follow the gold rush, but I'll do the best I can with what I have. I've been working with stakeholder groups, really redesigning how some of our reservoir systems work for 15 or 20 years. There's a lot of things to have anxiety about. I won't say be afraid of. There are a lot of things that are going to be challenges. But I wanted to stop a minute because I'm a glass half full guy. I want to talk about some of the things that we've got here in South Carolina and North Carolina that we should all be very proud of and thankful for. Rain is one of them. I mean, when it comes right down to it, we cannot do without rainfall. Every man-made system and natural system that we rely on depends on rainfall. We've got a lot of it here most of the time. Duke has a rain gauge system across its service area, and our long-term average is about 46 inches of rainfall. There are a lot of places in this country that would kill to be able to get, on average, 46 inches of rainfall. Reservoirs. A lot of these were handed down to us from generations in the past. Those generations had great vision, and we absolutely cannot do without those reservoirs. They're our bank account for those periods when it doesn't rain. Duke Energy, thankfully, has a lot of those. We have 42 storage reservoirs in North and South Carolina. And if you look at those together, it's about just under 140,000 surface acres, 3,000 miles of shoreline, 568 billion gallons of usable storage. That shoreline is enough to stretch from Charlotte to Vancouver, British Columbia. So one thing that means is we have a whole lot of next door neighbors, right? We have a lot of people that love that same resource. So we got to be very smart and wise about the way we use it. That volume of water, you're familiar with football stadiums, certainly. That's about 730 times the volume of the Cowboys Stadium in Texas. Things are bigger in Texas. If you looked at Panther Stadium, it would be a few more of those. We have got very, very active and constructive stakeholders involved in planning processes for our hydro projects, and Duke has a lot of those, and we've done a lot of this. One of the things that those stakeholder processes has been able to do is let's change the planning horizon from what used to be 5 years because we thought of MPDES permits. And then it went to 20 years. What we have been doing in these relicensing processes is looking at 50 years. You have to do that if all the options are going to be on the table with regard to future water supply. It takes a long, long time to enact some of these strategies. We've developed some very robust computer models to help us plan. The models aren't the plan. The plan is what you do with it. The models just help you make decisions. And we've developed some very good water quantity models that give us the ability to look at a whole lot of what-if scenarios with those stakeholders so we can see what, if we change operation, what the impacts are going to be to the interests. We've included climate variability in those. And that's been a difficult thing to do because the science, in particular in this part of the country, is not completely clear about what climate variability is going to bring with regard to water supply. But we've done that. One of the things I'm most proud of is we've turned our drought response from this is what Duke Energy needs to do to this is what the whole river basin needs to do. We've developed low inflow protocols that have specific triggers so you know when you're in whatever stage, And the parties that have actions know what their actions are ahead of time, and they're committed to do it. And if you've watched what's going on the Catawba Waterway, that whole river basin and the drought of record acted together. And that is what kept all our water intakes kept them all working. And we've shifted to the point really in the Catawba Basin of doing what I would call integrated resource planning across two sectors. It's not just the energy utility doing it, it's the water utilities also doing it. And we're doing it together because we recognize that we're sharing the same resource. There's some things that are changing in the electric utility sector and some other things that aren't really, and both of those are important relative to water. Some things that are changing, energy efficiency. You know, we have a legal obligation to serve our electric customers. Therefore, we have to produce enough electricity to keep the lights on for them. But through some formalized programs, we've been able to help those customers save a lot of energy. In the period from 2009 to 2014, our energy efficiency programs have conserved enough demand on our system to reduce our capacity need by 1,200 megawatts. That's about a nuclear unit. That is not insignificant in a 5-year period. And our customers have conserved about 2.5 million megawatt hours of energy in that time. If you take our generation mix that's on the Catawba to produce 2.5 million megawatt hours, you would consume about 1 billion gallons of water. So energy efficiency does save water in this state. Renewables, we can't forget about hydropower. It's where our company started, but it is a renewable resource, and it's a very reliable one, but solar is really coming on. As you know, our company has gotten really big into that. We'll be building the largest solar voltaic complex east of the Mississippi very soon in North Carolina. Water use efficiency, our generation mix is becoming more water use efficient. Why would that be? Is it solar that's doing it? Solar has a role, but natural gas prices have been very, very low. And that's allowed us to be able to bring gas-fired combined cycle into our generation mix. And it's much more water use efficient than our existing coal plants or nuclear plants are. Lake storage protection, we've gotten very focused on that. In the old days, if a city came and wanted to put a water intake in on one of Duke's reservoirs, we would mainly leave it up to them to decide how to design that intake structure, and whatever lake level they became limited at was their own business. We don't do that anymore. We've gone to more of a leadership role there where we're basically requiring them to show why it is that they couldn't build that water intake to operate with the lake as low as the hydro station can go. That's going to cost them some more money, but in the end, it benefits every one of us that relies on that lake storage, because if you falsely restrict that lake storage in an emergency situation, you're creating an emergency, or you're making the emergency worse. What's not changing, we're going to stay connected as far as water needs for energy production. Renewables are going to continue to grow, but I don't see any babies here. I don't think any of us are going to live to see the day when we don't need the steam cycle to meet our electric customers' needs. I hope we do, but I don't think we will. So water and energy are going to stay connected, and we need to be aware of that connection and get better at planning together. Cooling towers, that could have been in the change section, the Clean Water Act 316B ruling that came out recently. It's going to require us to go back and relook at some of our once-through cooling plants. If we have to put cooling towers on them, typically that will increase the water consumption by 30 to 40% from those plants, and that's not insignificant. Reservoirs are absolutely going to be a must. We got to protect them. We got to get more from them, and who knows, we may need to build some more of them someday. I'll leave you with just a few thoughts about what we can do to make a very positive difference in the water supply situation in South Carolina and North Carolina. When you talk about planning for water, people get get very anxious about that. They're afraid. We all think whoever the other person or entity is going to take our water from us. The water belongs to all of us. To minimize that anxiety, engage stakeholders. Absolutely engage them and communicate, even to the extent of over-communicating. People are going to forgive you for over-communicating. They're not going to if you won't tell them what's going on. You need to communicate. Do it right. Have good science. Take your time. Be patient. And prioritize. You know, every river basin needs a plan. Every river basin doesn't need a plan today. Some river basins are already well down that path. Some aren't. There needs to be some prioritization that goes on. Get to the river basin level. There is going to be there's a state water plan now, but there's going to be a new state water plan. But I would argue that rainfall doesn't understand law. The only law it does understand is gravity. So when rain falls, it follows topography, and if we're reliant on rainfall and surface water. So we have to be able to do river basin water supply plans if we're really going to get our arms around it and be effective at it. Engage stakeholders. Did I say that? I'm going to say it again, but you can't do too much of that. And the last thought, if you could see what the future was going to look like for water supply planning in South Carolina, and you could do that in the next day or two, would you want to do that? Everybody raise your hand if you'd like to see what the future looks like. I can't believe you came to this conference if you didn't want to see what the future looked like. I'm putting in a plug here, but if you raised your hand, please stay for the end of this conference and go to the HDR-led presentation. It's the last event in the water policy section, but Jonathan Williams is going to talk about the water supply master plan that the Catawba Water Management Group has developed. That's a nonprofit corporation of Duke Energy and 18 public water utilities that rely on the Catawba Watery Lake system. That is that integrated resource planning across sectors I was talking about. So please stay. Jonathan will have a lot of good things for you. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate being here and being on this esteemed panel. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to be here. I guess full disclosure, Senator Campbell was one of my mentors in the Low Country. And I want to take a little bit of a different angle, and it kind of relates to Senator Campbell, but it's about economic development. And I think we already had some mentions of economic development and the opportunities, I think, that are in front of us in the state of South Carolina. In order to look forward, you got to look back a little bit. So I'm 52 years old. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. Senator Campbell, I remember being on King Street in Charleston in about 1970, okay? And pretty much an area that was in relative, I would call it decline. And I think Mount Pleasant, I don't even know, North Charleston wasn't even a city until 1976, okay? I went to Clemson, Dr. Askew, so I didn't go until 1981, but I remember going to Greenville, South Carolina in 1981 to a bus station to pick up a friend, and I don't think a lot of people would go to Greenville back then, okay? All right, now I want to step forward, and let's look at 2014 and look where we are. Senator Campbell, you can't find a parking spot on King Street, I promise you. And the economic development activity that has grown around the Greenville-Spartanburg area is, quite frankly, you can just only call it impressive. That's where our state has come. Now, I do all that to tell you this and to kind of tie it back to water, to energy, into infrastructure and to kind of challenge you to think about over the course of the next 2 days some things we really got to get our head around in South Carolina. All right, so if we made all that improvement and we've fostered all this economic development from this time period of 1970, and a lot of you folks that I'm looking at, some of you don't look like you've been around that long, but a lot of you have, and so you remember that time period. We've done a remarkable thing. But what I'm telling you is that it is only the beginning. And the next 10 to 20 years, I think, are going to have the opportunity to be remarkable in terms of the development of the state. You could say, well, we've got an industry now like BMW in the upstate, and we've got a Boeing in the low country. I'm telling you, that's potentially the beginning of what could be an historical 20-year period. Now, you got to be ready for it. And I think that's the challenge that I throw out to this group is that, I don't know, I was riding up today, and by the way, I drive to Columbia almost every day. So I'm at least 3 times a week coming to this city from the low country. So I don't get to stay or get to go back. But someone quoted a statistic that they said in the low country there's 2 different numbers that are floating around there. Someone told me there were 34 people a day moving to the low country. Someone told me the top of that end was 50, okay? Every one of those is a consumer of water, of energy. You got to get ready for that. We've got to be planning for the ability to serve it all. And I think Jeff was so accurate in that we have an obligation as a utility. All our utilities have an obligation to be ready to serve, whether it's water or sewer. But you got to be, or energy, whatever it is. But you got to be ready. If we don't take advantage of the opportunities and do the planning, then we're going to miss the opportunity. And it's not just the 2 regions I talked about. Obviously, there are others. York County, there's plenty of others. But not only do you have to, I think the appropriate terms were integrated resource plan. You got to really think about what we want to do as a state and plan, and also think about how we want to fund that. And you've got to do it in a way that's smart, responsible, and doesn't put a disproportionate share on anybody that can't afford it. That's a huge challenge. We take it seriously in the utility business. We take it serious when it comes to the generation mix. But it's hugely important what you're doing today. So, Dr. Ask, I commend you and Clemson for putting this conference together, because I think it provides us for the opportunity to have those discussions. I'll save most of my remarks. Jeff covered a lot of things that I would say with respect to a couple of items. But I think the big things that for us in the energy business, obviously we're big users. And I think Jeff's right. You're not going to, over the course of the next 10 years, you're not going to see baseload generation become a thing of the past. It's here. It's got to be here to serve the load. But I do think that as a result of some forward-thinking approaches and Act 236, I think you'll start to see renewable energy become a bigger piece of the equation when it comes to energy infrastructure and integrated resource planning. So as things move forward, that will have an impact, not only from the standpoint of water consumption and where energy comes from, but in the way we think of things and the way things connect to each other. So I think that's a big piece of something that's got to be in the plan. I certainly like the mention of natural gas and the opportunities that are created there, and in terms of how that can have an impact on water. And I think Jeff also mentioned the energy efficiency piece. I've got my integrated resource plan actually in that folder. I thought enough of it to bring it with me, but our energy efficiency opportunities that scan it through our demand side management program have created that same type of reduction in consumption, I think that's huge, and it ultimately has this impact on water. Got to think about where we're going just collectively as a state when it comes to carbon. Do we, depending upon how broader public policy addresses carbon, it's ultimately going to have an impact on water. I remember the drought of '07. Actually, you reminded me it was a terrible time because we depend on water as a utility. For us, it's 221 megawatts of hydropower. It's the biggest part of our renewable portfolio at this time. But if the water gets too low, it has a huge impact on the ability of the utility to actually produce energy. I remember in '07, and I was talking to one of my renewable guys on the way up, and I was asking him about some comments, and he happened to be a system guy, and he said the worst day of his life was '07. He thought they were going to have to shut down Williams Station because actually they had the salinity got to the point where they thought they were going to have to shut it down because the intakes were going to essentially damage the power plant, which would have been about 600 megawatts going offline. You cannot minimize the interdependence of all our resources. So with that, I just close and tell you, hey, it's an opportunity for the next 2 days. Think about resource planning, integrated resource planning, how things connect to each other. Remember that if we work together and work collaboratively, we have the greatest chance, I think, of enjoying what are potentially the next 20 years of economic prosperity. If we do the right things with respect to infrastructure, we really move the state forward into another great era. Thank you.
Good morning. As Dr. Eaton mentioned, I'm Jeff Penland. I work for Santee Cooper. I'm a lawyer, and I work in public policy for Santee Cooper. I've been with Santee Cooper a little over 10 years. In all disclosure, I am not a water expert. My technical experts are here, Susan Jackson and Mike Harrelson. I work in public policy. Prior to coming to work for Santee Cooper, I didn't have a lot of experience in water policy, but early on in the job, one of my first experiences at Santee Cooper was serving as a support staff for our CEO, who was assigned to the governor's Water Law Review Committee. And I remember sitting in one of the first meetings there, might have been the first one, and someone threw out some quotes that have stuck with me since then. And one of those quotes was, when the well goes dry, and these are probably old standbys for you water folks, but when the well goes dry, we learn the worth of water. Ben Franklin said that. And I think that's what this conference is really about. His idea is that you've got to be concerned with water. The good news for South Carolina is we do already know the value of water, as it's been mentioned today, and as all of you know. We just have to make sure the well doesn't go dry. One of the other quotes that I remember from that time was, whiskey is for drinking and water's for fighting. And apparently Mark Twain said that. And I can see that definitely, as I've learned over the years, that quote has a lot of truth. What I realized, I kind of sat up a little bit when I was sitting in those meetings, and I realized water policy was a little bit more interesting than I thought it would be, than I originally thought. So I at least got my attention. And when I came to work for Santee Cooper, I learned a little bit about its history. And Santee Cooper, as many of the folks here know, was part of the state's water plan about 75 years ago. In 1939, our state's leaders decided to use the Santee River and the Cooper River in order to make hydroelectric power for rural South Carolina and also to support navigation. So they diverted the Santee River into the Cooper River and created Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie and created enough head of water to produce what is today about 127 megawatts of electricity. At the time, those folks thought that would be enough electricity to support the needs that Santee Cooper was expected to serve in perpetuity. And a lot has obviously changed since then, and that's one thing I think we know as planners is that change is constant. And so we have to constantly be prepared for that. Put it in perspective, Santee Cooper now has about 5,669 megawatts of summer electric generating capability. We have electric generating facilities or transmission lines or distribution lines in all 46 counties. We serve indirectly or directly electric customers in all 46 counties, and those customers, either indirect or direct, represent over 40% of the state's population. We also operate 2 water utilities who serve water wholesale to retail suppliers in 6 counties. And those lakes, Lake Moultrie and Lake Marion, where we had our start, as Senator Campbell knows, they support boating, they support fishing, hunting. There's a lot of aquatic life tied to those systems now. They're the home of the world-famous freshwater striped bass. That's where they had their home thanks to those lakes. They serve industry, they serve drinking water to rural areas, and they're the backdrop for many people's backyards. So a lot has changed since we began, and again, you have to plan for it. And as Danny mentioned, as Jeff mentioned, that's driven by growth, and that's what we have to prepare for. Santee Cooper expects South Carolina to continue to grow, and we're working hard and aggressively to support that growth through job creation and the economy. But we'll continue to do that in a responsible manner. Just a few highlights for things we're doing on the environmental front that support water being used in a responsible way. We're the state's leader in the development of renewables. We've got solar projects, we've got biomass, landfill gas, we've got wind, and a lot of those renewable projects use less water than traditional generation. So we're using a little bit less water as we develop more of those renewables. We've got, we're closing several units, several coal units, and we'll use less water as a result of that. We've got coal combustion residual material, also known as CCRs, that we are managing responsibly as part of the closure of those units. We're actually beneficially reusing that material, moving it from the Walkamaw River and the Tail Race Canal in Monk's Corner to be used by cement manufacturers. So we're excited about that. We're hoping that the EPA's drinking water regs coming up, being finalized right now, will support our plan. We expect it will. We believe it should. We're prepared for the cooling water intake regs that have been established under 316B, and we're pleased with working with DHEC under the surface water permitting law that was passed through Act 247 in 2010. So we are working with the stakeholders, kind of looking forward with the water plan. Santee Cooper supports the concept of DHEC, what DHEC and DNR are doing related to the water assessment. We commend the legislature. I feel like a nickel with a bunch of dollars up here. We commend the legislature for what they did with showing leadership for state water planning by passing the surface water legislation, and all these folks here played an integral part in that, and that was a tough compromise. As Senator Campbell referenced, 5 years of back and forth with a lot of stakeholders. Mark Hollis, I know from Duke Energy, he's in the audience. He was a part of that. It was not an easy process, but that compromise was forged under a lot of tension, and we're pleased with that product, and agree with Senator Campbell in letting and Senator Verdon letting that kind of play out. We're interested in the assessment process going forward. We hope that we'll have a chance to provide input before any decisions are made, and we just hope that we'll be kept updated along the way in a timely fashion. So at the end of the day, I guess South Carolina can count on Santee Cooper to do the right thing as it relates to water planning and also meeting the future needs of our electric and water customers. So thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Dyke Spencer, and I've been past chair of the Water Utility Council for the state of South Carolina for the past 2 years. So I've spent many hours talking to public water utilities across the state about what they think is important about state water planning. And I've worked for large utilities, and I've currently worked for a very small utility, so I've kind of been on both ends of the spectrum. When I knew I was going to be part of this panel the other day, I wrote down just some bullet points of things that I think are observations that I've heard in these discussions, and some that you've already heard, maybe a few that you haven't. Just to tell you a little bit about public water utilities. Public water utilities, most of us have been chartered by the state of South Carolina to serve a certain area with water and/or sewer or other utilities, and we're charged to do that with our charter. And what that means is this economic growth that you hear. Many of these utilities have to take on large amounts of debt to build infrastructure to build for that growth that we know that's coming, that's projected. And I think that's something that a lot of the general public doesn't really understand, that we carry a large part of that debt. We have to be extremely professional about the way we run these businesses and stay ahead of that curve that's always changing. So it's a challenge for public water utilities to do that. When we're issued a permit, whether it's a groundwater permit or a surface water permit on paper, we got to know there's sound science behind that paper, because we're going and leveraging debt, to build that infrastructure, to take that water capacity that's reflected on that permit so we can provide for that growth that's coming. So that's always a challenge that's on our plate. Water is a little bit different than the power guys here. Water is kind of a local issue. We're typically withdrawing water from a well or a reservoir or lake, some water body that's relatively close to where we're serving that water. We're not putting that water out on the grid and it's getting used 300 miles away somewhere else. So it's a local issue. These gentlemen know it's a local issue. Each one of them has numerous water districts in each one of their districts, and I'm sure they know just about every one of them personally. So it's a personal type business too. Water needs to be managed by basin. I don't think many of us will disagree with that, and we've got to do a better job of doing that in this state. And Jeff outlined some very good things that are going on in this state. We need to take that and build on it in this state. We've got a lot more work to do as far as basin planning and water planning in this state, and I think we've got the experts in this state to do it. Truthfully, we have the experts in this small state to probably be world-renowned. If you just look at Dr. Eisen's Intelligent River Project, that's sitting right here in our back door. I mean, we could take that real-time data and basin management and marry those things together, and we've probably got some of the best stuff anybody's got in the world to look at water planning with. Stakeholders, it's already been mentioned, but we've got to do a better job of involving stakeholders. There's a large population of people that I call experts in this state, and we're very fortunate. We got a lot of good water experts in this state, but you got to pull all those people together. You can't do water planning in a vacuum and come out and say, here it is, and expect everybody to buy into it. You can't do it that way. So I encourage us, as we meet in this conference, to collaborate. I've heard that word probably a dozen times already, but that's something that we've got to learn to do better. And we need a leader. We need somebody to lead this challenge and this charge. If we're going to do water planning in an effective way in the state, somebody's got to grab the ball and the reins and run with it, and everybody's got to get on that train together. And if there's a challenge I'll lay out to everybody today, that's what we've got to do better. We've got a water plan that's due for a revision from 5 years ago. It's time to take that thing, tear it apart, and put it back together. It's not time to put a red cover on a blue document. It's time to take it down piece by piece, rebuild it. Let's put a water plan together that means something, that makes us take action in the state. And we're overdue for that. And I think a lot of times we forget that document is still sitting there. Funding is going to be a continued issue, and this is something I've heard from many utilities across the state, is how we're going to fund state water planning in the state. Water planning doesn't work real well if you got to go beg for money every year for it. Okay? And you got to go demonstrate what you're going to do. But if you have a reoccurring funding source in this state that will take care of water planning in this state, and which there's other states doing this already, that we could pattern this behind, then we are not trying to back into a dollar figure to do planning. We actually have money to do the things that a master plan and planning tells us we need to be doing. And right now, these guys here, they get hit all the time for funding, but that dollar figure comes out, and then we have to kind of back into whatever that dollar amount is. We got to figure out how to fund water planning in this state without coming to our legislative committees and begging for that money every year. We've got to find a way to do that reoccurring to where we know that money's there next year. And I can tell you, you look at some of our neighboring states right now, and they're struggling with the same thing. I mean, Georgia, they took off like a bang, but I think right now they're wishing they had a little bit more reoccurring funding coming into that program, some of the things that they've laid out that they got to do now. So it's, we can learn from others. I'm not saying we pattern what we do behind any other state, but there's plenty to learn from out there. There are many other states doing water planning across the country right now. I would like to think that we can do all of what I'm talking about without being legislatively driven to do it. And I'd like to know that we don't have to have legislation that makes us do that. I hope that we do this because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to represent the South Carolina Farm Bureau's position as it relates to conservation of our natural resources, and particularly to water use. You may confuse Farm Bureau when you hear it and say, well, wonder what an insurance guy is standing up there talking about. But South Carolina Farm Bureau was started in 1944. We're a grassroots membership organization open to anyone who wants to help keep family farmers in business and rural lifestyles thriving across the state. Farm Bureau has a number of different entities. We have helped farmers market crops from hogs to apples to grains. We also sell batteries and tires, for that matter. Most of them go to farmers. Through the years, science has taught us that it's best not to overtill the soil. Precision agriculture tools are in place to make certain that we put only the amount of inputs on our crops that are absolutely necessary for quality crop development and production. Crop and computer technologies are in place to closely monitor soil moisture and nutrient conditions on our crops. Successful farmers that I know make wise business decisions about those inputs. Farmers are also guided by the fact that we need to double ag productivity over the next 40 years to feed a growing world while using less land and less water. Farmers and ranchers are already doing quite a bit more with less, and we'll continue to do that. The American Farm Bureau, which South Carolina Farm Bureau is affiliated with, has been involved with a project with the Colorado-based Keystone Center to measure agriculture's environmental progress. After measuring 5 key resource indicators like land use, soil loss, water use, carbon emissions, and energy use over a 20-year period. Keep in mind, I said 20 years, not 50 or 100. From 1987 to 2007 tells a very positive story. Since corn, especially for renewable fuels, seems to get a lot of negative attention these days, let me use it as just one example. Over the 20 years in this study, per acre corn production grew by 41%. Per bushel land use was reduced by 37%. Per bushel soil loss was reduced by nearly 70%. Water use dropped by an average of 27% per bushel. Greenhouse gas emissions were down 8% per acre, or 30% per bushel. Today, there's a tremendous amount of investment in developing crops that are tolerant to variations in the availability to water. A leading company has discovered genetics that control water uptake in plants. The gene will actually slow the metabolism of the plant to allow it to wait for rainfall. But the irrational debate on biotechnology, or genetically modified organisms, GMOs for short, has created non-tariff trade barriers that have limited worldwide adaptation of the technology. As an aside, I visited Kenya about 6 years ago on a trip designed to promote the use of biotechnology. The drought-tolerant genetics were given to companies willing to breed it into seed for use in Kenya, but the hysteria in the European Union and the influence that Europe has on the African countries has stymied those advances. I tell you this to emphasize the point that science and the adoption of technology can have a dramatic impact on water usage if the public perception with no scientific basis does not halt the use of that technology. Today, we continually hear the debate on climate change. It's a very polarizing issue. Again, I believe that science can provide the answers that we need. I do find myself agreeing that fundamentally that the weather has changed. If you look at the number and the strength of storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, and typhoons over the past few years, you can definitely see that there are changes in the weather patterns. But is this really any different than, say, in 1956, some almost 60 years ago, when Hurricane Hazel struck? It was devastating, and what's more, it had a dramatic impact on the economic development of Myrtle Beach. We saw development move to places that didn't have the history of those severity of hurricanes. Speaking of planting, from my perspective, the varieties of corn that we plant today have very different characteristics than what I planted when I started farming a little over 40 years ago. I know I don't look that old, but yeah, I have been involved in agriculture for all my life, but farming for 40 years. It's difficult to predict which piece of agricultural management will drive farmers' plans. Those planning tools today includes things like seed technology, variable rate fertilization, variable rate irrigation, tissue sampling, and management technologies driven by increases in information available to the farmer. We're on the very cusp of a huge revolution in the types and the quantities of information available to the farmer. You heard someone speak of big data. I understand that before long the country will be crisscrossed with sensors to be able to help the meteorologists predict the weather. We also know about the Intelligent Rivers Project, and that's one reason Farm Bureau is so interested in that project. How can we really make really wise decisions without real-time data? That'll make a huge change. I heard recently a speaker say that this increase in information from big data per se we could actually compare the revolution that we'll see in what we do to the industrial revolution of the 18th century. That's saying quite a lot if you look back at how people lived in the 1800s and how we live today. We've heard people talk today about drought, and we've heard about talking about shutting down power plants. Economists say that the last drought in South Carolina, there were over $1 billion worth of agricultural losses alone. The cost of beef today, and I'm sure that there are many of you in here that buy a steak from time to time. The cost of beef today is directly a result of the loss of pasture land and early marketing of cattle in Texas and Oklahoma. We talk about storing water for hydroelectric facilities, and that's one thing that agriculture is very interested in. I believe one hydrologist recently said that water distribution is really what the problem is. Water may be there, but not necessarily there when you need it. We need to keep it when we have it and then use it from those impoundments. That may lead us to some workable guidelines in the future. but that's something under the purview of the Corps of Engineers. We've seen a number of lawsuits lately dealing with water impoundments. It's a difficult question to answer. But as we start talking about quantity, I made a note a little bit earlier, and Davey, you mentioned that you had 3 inches of rain. If you live on a 1 acre lot, you had almost 4 million gallons of water drop on your house and surrounding land today. So rainfall is a great thing, and again, we enjoy around 40 plus inches a year, and we need to find ways to store that water for agricultural use. We agree that the state needs a water plan that's updated often and comprehensively. Farm Bureau lobbied in favor of that plan that we have today, and we supported the funding for that plan. There are those out there who would argue that farmers need to be held to the same regulatory requirements as manufacturing or utility users. The reality is that we just can't shut off the water to crops whenever there's a need. We just can't shut the spigot off and come back in 2 or 3 weeks and pick up where we left off. Most farmers, whether you're a farm 100 acres or 21,000 acres, don't have the resources to sustain multiple years with no rainfall or limited rainfall. In closing, agribusiness is the state's largest economic engine, and like any other industry in the state, we hope that we can grow our crop production to generate more jobs and contribute more tax dollars to support our state. In order to have growth, we must have regulatory stability. We cannot let our laws and regulations be written and rewritten by emotion and amended on fits and whims. Decisions must be based on sound science, math, historical data, and hopefully real-time data in the future. I'd say that Farm Bureau has a really good track record of working with divergent groups to seek compromise and consensus as we fulfill a stewardship role in working with God's creation. Ag has demonstrated it can adapt with the aid of technology. Before I sit down, I want to make a comment. We just heard recently that 33 people move into the low country every day, and they're counting on water and utilities. They're also counting on food. Remember, every time you sit down at the table, unless you grew it yourself, that food started on a farm somewhere. Thank you.
David told me right before he started up here, he said farming business is the only one he knows that buys at retail and sells at wholesale. So I don't know if that's a good business model or not, but we left room at the end. You've heard a lot of good discussion. You've got some people up here that are doing what needs to be done in this state for water resource planning. We know how important it is. This side, we try to provide for it with legislation and funding where we can. This side is trying to do their things to help us make this state better and make sure we got resources going forward. So we're going to open this up to questions. And Gene, I think that's what we want to do is to please come forward and let us know. Ask us a question. We'll address it to the right person. Or if you'd like to call out someone up here when you ask the question, we'd be happy to do that too. So now it's you've heard everybody up here say we want to listen to our constituents. We want to listen to what comes in here. We can't do what we do without what y'all do, and you need to challenge us, and you need to let us know what's on your mind. So please come forward, and we're happy to open with questions.
Okay. My name is George Grinton. I'm from the city of Aiken. Question is for the legislative side of the panel. Where on your radar screen is management of underground water resources?
You know, basically we try to look at the underground aquifer systems. We've got DHEC and DNR that look at a lot of this stuff. They do a lot of surveys with what's on the underground systems. We know that that's very important because in the long term, that is probably the source of our water. Surface water is something we can measure, and we get that with rain. But as far as monitoring and what goes on in the underground aquifers, I'll turn it over to my other panelists here if they got any comments to make.
Well, Water Plan Don will tell you that we're not doing enough and need to do it sooner rather than later. I'll just answer question honestly, way on the, yes, we're on the radar screen. Barely a blip with everything else that's in front of us. But the challenge is obvious.
If the immediate need was surface water, and so we paneled that one, we do need to look at underground systems.
I mean, underground water does, connect to above ground water. It also is impacted by the rainfall we talk about. And, at the city of Aiken, 80% of our water is from well sources. And I'm sure there are other areas of the state. Not every area of the state is blessed with, good underground water. I just think it's an important thing that needs to be addressed, and it is part of the whole water cycle.
Yes, sir, it's part of the plan, and that's one of my concerns on dredging the Savannah River. I'm afraid we'll breach some of those underground aquifers and leak salt water into it. We'll have a desalination issue.
Paul, can I add to that? One of the things that you need to understand about groundwater is that when we overpump our groundwater and cause these cones of depression, sometimes it takes 10 years or more, and sometimes I don't know when that thing rebounds. And in the state of South Carolina, we don't have enough test wells that we can keep an accurate monitoring or inventory of what we actually have in groundwater. So we should be ever vigilant when we draw excessively from the groundwater. The surface water is probably the best way to start, and use groundwater more or less as a backup to our surface water system. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Good comment. Good question.
Good morning. I'm Eric Krieger. I'm Director of Science for the Nature Conservancy in South Carolina, and I have one note in the plenary preparation was about the 2.2 overall infrastructure, 2.2 billion infrastructure bill coming over the next 20 years, and I just wondered if anybody on the panel or a number of people would like to comment on what the sort of the forward thinking on how that money is going to materialize over the next 20 years.
Yes. I've got a real concern about the infrastructure on the water systems, the way we handle it, the way we process it, the way we treat our waste and sewage. I've got a real problem with that. I think it's a concern because so much of that funding comes from the federal government. And as I said earlier, the Fed funds are going to dry up. So we've got to be ready to handle that at this end. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but we do have to work on our infrastructure. We're continuing to grow and multiply in South Carolina, and we've got to be sure that we're handling the infrastructure and keeping it up to date. Otherwise, we can have all the water we want. We can't get it to you. And we can't treat the waste. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
I'll speak to that from the public utility standpoint. It is an ongoing challenge, especially for some of the larger utilities that have pipe that are 100 years old in the ground, and they're doing massive replacement programs of that pipe. That's a lot more difficult to do now that you've got more highways and streets and storm drain and everything else in the ground. So there's going to be a challenge in the future of how they balance rates to cover the cost of doing that rehabilitation in their system, and it's going to have to be on a continual basis just to keep up with it. So it's definitely something that's being looked at all across the country right now.
And the cost of doing it's continuing to go up, and permitting becomes more of a tricky issue because of some of the issues you mentioned.
Correct.
Paul, is one thing I'd like to see with regard to water and water rates. We've gotten into that very heavily up in the Anderson area. What I would like to see is that water revenues from the distribution of water stay in water revenues and not be transferred out to other parts of cities and municipalities' needs. There's a lot of money that is transferred that comes in as a result of water, which needs to stay in water so that we can keep adequate infrastructure. So I know Greenville does it. They don't allow any of their water rate reserves to go to any other department other than the water department itself. And we need to look at that statewide because so many people and so many cities and municipalities look at that as a source of revenue for their sagging budgets, and it should stay within water.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm Gene McCall, an attorney from Greenville. The last 2 times I've been to court have been on water law or water fights over who gets the water and how much. I think our investigation of our water resources is very important, but I think the $2 million that has been allocated is woefully inadequate. I think Georgia spent $32 million on their state water resource modeling. The other thing is we recommended back in 2004, the Water Law Review Committee, that the government be allowed to intervene in private lawsuits that involve water, because sometimes bad facts make bad law. And the government ought to be able to intervene, and I think the legislators ought to consider that.
Thank you, sir. I think you make a lot of good points, but we've got DHEC and DNR working on the issue now as we speak. That's where the $2 million is going to, and we're going to continue to do what we can with the limited amount of resources we have in state. I think that's why we have to have a collaboration among the higher education institutions and among our regulatory agencies to make sure we leverage as much as we can that money. Y'all jump in if you...
Thank you, Senator Campbell. I want to, first of all, thank all the speakers. It was a very informative, a great set of comments were made. My name is Garrett Yopsis. I'm the Southeast Regional Director for American Rivers. One thing that especially resonated with me were the comments of Dyke Spencer about the need for a new state water plan and stable recurring funding for our water infrastructure and our water resources. And I would just like to ask the elected officials here, again, with that very real need we have, and as you all know, we have these continual annual battles for more funding. What are the opportunities that we can take advantage of to create that stable funding resource for our water infrastructure and our other water needs in the state? Do you have suggestions on how we can move forward with that?
I'll tackle it, and it isn't going to be very popular with ratepayers, but the stable funding source is the existing funding source, and that's rates. In South Carolina and the country, we're going to pay more to fix the roads. We're going to pay more. We're paying more for electrical usage now, and we're going to have to pay probably more to reinvest in the water infrastructure. That's not going to be a politically popular pill to diagnose or to prescribe, but it's the nature of inflation and the cost of living and the cost of building out the infrastructure. And we are struggling with that big time right now as we address this transportation infrastructure debate. But I don't see anything better. As Senator Campbell said, a lot of infrastructure programs that were initiated at the federal level are either dwindling or dying out, winding down, and we have to continue to, like local government tells the state government all the time, well, we have to, y'all prescribe it, we have to pay for it. Well, we're in the same boat here as it relates to, unless something dramatic happens at the federal level from a funding or a bonding basis. We need to think big. We've got to dream big to keep the country forward moving. But as far as the mechanism's already there. Now, in my community, where we have a dwindling number of ratepayers on our existing utility systems, it goes back to the big question, well, we got to grow our economy. We've got to see this whole state from not just the tourism areas, but in a utilitarian community like I live in that was thriving 30, 40, 50 years ago, but has been in somewhat of decline since. We've got to have jobs. We've got to see an uptick in the overall economic well-being of every community in the state.
That needs to go in, as Senator Burton said, it certainly needs to go into the people that use the water should pay for what you're talking about. Just as though we pay those that use the gasoline pay something, and we got to address that issue too, because we don't pay enough. And that's a difficult issue, because my real concern is the federal government in the next 4, 5, 10 years is going to have much fewer dollars to put into the states. So we got to grow our own. We got to take care of our own stuff here, and it's going to be a user fee. If you use water, you ought to pay something for the resource planning. You ought to put in something for the infrastructure, and it ought to be calculated in the rates, because that's really where it needs to go. We got to find out. 50% of our budget about it that we allocate, and we allocate about $7 billion in the General Assembly. Over 50% of it goes to K-12 and higher education. And then you throw in what we have to do for the social programs, and Medicaid, and Medicare, that kind of stuff. Have a very limited amount of resources we can throw at it. So it really should go back to the users. I agree with Senator Burton very much on that one.
Thank you very much.
Now, we'll get run out of the General Assembly if we try to raise taxes, I can tell you that. So y'all have a different panel up here.
My name is Oscar Bradley Eckhoff. I live at the Oaks, just south of Orangeburg, retirement community. I'm 87 years old. I'm a geologist, geophysicist, and I have learned that the human species is incapable of foresight. It cannot perceive or be interested in what is going to happen 5 years in the future, 50 or 500 years in the future if we do such and such today. There is no chance whatsoever of economic growth continuing, because when we use up all the natural resources, everything collapses, and the more and the faster we use up our natural resources, the faster the collapse will occur. Well, I think that's about all I can say.
Thank you, sir. But the human species is not capable of planning ahead because we want immediate needs, I think is what he's saying. So we need to be thinking about the future. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Hi, Eric Strom. I'm a director of USGS here in South Carolina. And I just would be remiss if I didn't say that we do have a couple of hundred real-time stream flow monitoring and water quality monitoring networks in this state. And we've done real-time monitoring here for about 30 years now.
Cool.
And we've got about 8,000 nationwide, so the data are available, and there is a talk in the next session called Beyond the Stream Gauge if you want to learn more about what we're doing in this state in real time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your comments. Yes, ma'am.
Gentlemen, my name is Andrea Hughes. I'm a graduate student at the University of South Carolina. I sort of have two very brief questions. The first is we have electric cooperatives in which the end member users or the customers are kind of bearing the load to maintain the infrastructure. Has a water cooperative system on a basin by basin scale been considered at any point? And the other question I have is, part of water use is the generation of electricity, but the electric grid is aging and it's very inefficient. And I know that's a nationwide problem. Are there any thoughts, discussions, plans in the future for the state of South Carolina to improve the efficiency of the electric grid in general as a way to reduce the water that we use?
Gentlemen?
Well, I'll start on that one. I think a personal note, I think one thing we need to do in this state, and I think it probably makes the regulatory agency's life easier too, is some system consolidation. We probably have too many water utilities in the state. I mean, that's, many of them do very, very good jobs out there, but I think there's an economy of scales you reach when you can definitely pull together a large-scale area and serve it with one entity rather than 10 different entities. Each one of them is going to have a backhoe. You know, there's just a quick example right there. You don't need 10 backhoes to do that. So, so and I've been involved in a lot of this in the utility in the Low Country in my earlier life, and I think there are opportunities. I don't know if you could call them co-ops. So you got to look at the way we're legislatively set up. So there's there's probably some things that we'd have to get through to be able to pull a co-op together. But there have been merging of utilities and people acquiring other utilities. That's taken place in this state quite a bit in the past. And probably you're going to see it in the future as well. So.
The electrical grid, do you want to, one of you guys want to address that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. And it may take a little while to work through this, but.
Pull it up.
How about that? Better? Okay. Yeah. The utilities, for the most part, they invest in their infrastructure. I think the challenge is that, you know, if you're going to do say, larger capital projects, if you're going to build a nuclear plant, for instance, then that takes a lot of resources. but that then takes away from maybe other resources for the transmission and the distribution of the energy. Now, the state's done a really smart thing by passing legislation which starts to get utility companies and really ultimately consumers thinking about distributed energy and what impact that has. And of course, you can get into kind of a back and forth debate about what's the value of the distributed energy resources. I think what the state's done is taken a very measured but reasonable approach to start the process of determining what distributed energy resources are in terms of value. If they're spread out all over the system, do we derive some benefit? Does the utility and the consumer derive benefit? And if that benefit is quantifiable, let's set a construct together that can essentially address that. So it may mean that we may need to invest less in infrastructure ultimately. I think that's what at least most people who advocate for distributed resources say. I think the challenge is you got to recognize that it costs. It ends up in the rates in some way, shape, or form. And so you've got to make it fair and balanced. And I think that's the challenge. The reality is you've got to, and I think that's a constant theme we've talked about, whether it be water or energy, you've got to invest if you want to get to the next step. Just got to do it in kind of a reasonable and kind of thoughtful manner to be able to get what you need done.
If I could add to that, just to point out with some of the other the EPA has some regulations that they passed. The 316B regulation is one that is geared towards water efficiency, moving from once cooled systems to a cooling tower. So that they are working on that. There also other regs like the Clean Air Act, carbon dioxide regulations. Those are likely going to have a natural attrition related to coal generation, which will reduce the consumption of water as well. And also those regulations are promoting natural gas and also renewables. And so with that promotion by policy, you're going to see less consumption with that model that they're trying to promote. Now, I'd caution one aspect of that is cost. So one side of that is what that costs the consumer, as Danny mentioned, and also reliability can be a factor too for that. But that's what's happening through the EPA.
Was really a great question, and on the transmission end, I'm not an expert at all in that, but I did spend some time in power plant siting. One of the things that's really important is to try to get a new power plant, if you're siting one, close to the load center. The closer you get to where the customers are, the less you're going to lose in the transmission of that energy in heating up electric lines and so forth. And because this is about water, somebody might say, well, why don't you put all your future power plants in the places in the state where there's the greatest water availability? Well, that's thought, and that is obviously a consideration in plant siting. But if that's not where the people are that you're trying to serve, you're going to have to build a bigger plant there at that location that may have a lot of water to be able to provide the same amount of energy to your customers. So it's a bit of a tug of war. One other just quick thing, you mentioned the concept of a water cooperative. We really haven't called it that, but that Catawba Water Management Group that I mentioned earlier, that really acts a whole lot like a cooperative. And it's a 501c3 where all the members actually pay dues to get their work done. And they apportion those dues based on the amount of water they withdraw from that shared lake system. That's how we got that work done. And because we were 501c3, we were able to get cost share funding from the state of South Carolina, the state of North Carolina, and the Duke Energy Foundation to get that water supply master plan done. So there are ways to skin this thing if we work together on it, but doing good work costs money.
Have time for one more question.
My name is Hugo Crispin. I am a property owner on the North Fork of the Edisto, and with the potato farm arriving on the South Fork, I became involved in some sort of citizen advocacy and journalism things. Through that, I've had a chance to talk to Mr. Winkles. I've had a chance to meet the folks from Walters Farms. And, you know, I guess I would just like to task y'all with, at some point, we need to do something. And I understand that the overriding interest here is not to act quickly and intemperately and do the wrong thing inadvertently. But at some point, we need to stop talking and start doing.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. And listen, this whole panel appreciates the attention and the room being full like it is. Water is really a precious resource. We've got enough if we manage it. Fortunately, we're not California, we're not Nevada, we're not in some of the western states. So that's your charge while you're here these 2 days, to come up with a plan that will help all of us. Gene, I'll turn it back over to you.
I think this was a very enjoyable plenary. I think it was a good discussion, and I really appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate the remarks. I think we should give them a round of applause. That concludes the morning plenary. If you want to stay for the Your Day session, which starts in a few minutes, you're welcome to stay. Again, those questions will be asked by Donna London with Your Day. Otherwise, thank you. Enjoy the break, and then please attend the first session. Thank you.